All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have my guest today, Teri Barney. Teri, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So Teri is not just an occupational therapist with 20 years of experience. She is the first occupational therapist, or OT, I've had on the podcast. She finds fulfillment in helping children, teens, and adults achieve good physical and mental health through meaningful functional activities, sensory integration, and psychosocial interventions. As an occupational therapist, an adoptive parent of two boys from Eastern Europe, Teri has a special interest in addressing attachment and complex trauma through activity and relationship-based interventions that promote competence, self-regulation, and confidence. Teri's recently completed an intensive 80-hour post-grad program at Attach, that's ATTACH, an international coalition of professionals and families dedicated to helping those with attachment difficulties. All right, Teri, obviously just kind of you in a nutshell, but share with our listeners where you're calling from and where you're from, and let's do it.
Sure. I'm calling from South Glastonbury, Connecticut. I currently work in a therapeutic school in Connecticut. I love my profession as an occupational therapist. I've been an occupational therapist for over 23 years and working in a variety of medical and educational settings. As you said, I'm also an adoptive parent, which has kind of been part of my journey into the trauma-informed care world. Mm-hmm. I love English bulldogs, growing sunflowers, ballroom dancing, playing Scrabble.
Okay.
So those are my occupations.
Okay. I am really excited to have you on here because, as you may or may not have known, in my last job, I worked in a community clinic here in Northern California for 5 years, and we were assessing and treating kids showing early signs of psychosis. And on the team, we had an OT. And as you kind of alluded to, many of us didn't know what that was. So let's break it down. Let's start out. And I think more of it will kind of come out and unfold as we speak. But give us your definition of what an occupational therapist or an OT does, et cetera.
Sure. So it's really occupational therapy. I can think we do that a lot because it encompasses so much. But I love the profession, and it's exciting. It's really the only profession that helps people across the lifespan to do the things they want and need to do through the use of therapeutic daily activities. So we use activity to help achieve health. And, we really look to the person's diagnosis is important in terms of giving us a frame of reference of what we're working on. But really, we're more interested in the present moment and where this person is going. What's important to them? What do they want to do? Right. So, there's sort of several things that we look at as occupational therapists, or that we specialize in. One, as I already said, is the purposeful use of activity. Using activities to learn a lot about you, to figure out what your strengths are, to figure out where your weaknesses are, and to help you to feel confident to move on from the space that you're in. We're experts at analyzing activities, figuring out what all the steps are in an activity and where a client might be breaking down. We're great at adapting activities so that someone can do them with the limitations that they have, and also in adapting the environment, which is really critical when you look at people with sensory issues and trauma.
Yeah, I'm sitting here nodding my head in agreement because I'm recognizing a lot of what you said from my own experience. Not having previous experience with working with an OT, I didn't know what they did. And, whereas myself, kind of when I was seeing clients as a younger clinician, and having had the kind of trauma education that I did have, I was, and being pretty naive and inexperienced, I was eager to get in there, and kind of implement certain interventions. And oftentimes, as we all know, many times people who've experienced trauma, talking isn't the best thing to do at a specific time. And as you were explaining, finding activities, bringing to life again, right? Activities that this particular person once loved or likes to do can oftentimes be a great way just to engage the client and to give them confidence and to empower them. That was one of my experiences. So I'm here nodding in agreement to everything you're saying, and I really appreciate it. And I think a lot of clinicians don't really, in my experience, just don't know that, don't have that experience. So
exactly, and I love you. You hit the nail on the head for me, because my my passion sort of are, you noted that not to talk as much, to try not, that you were inclined to talk more, and that's always my big piece of advice to people is stop talking and do more with the clients, and the talking will come.
Right.
Yeah.
So your story is, from what I've heard here is pretty interesting. Let's kind of start, and I do want you to tell us the story of how you kind of got into this field and where along that journey the adoptive parent happened.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I think that sort of happened first, but
okay.
Let me start a little bit, because I think back in about 2003, 2004, I was working in a rural elementary school in Connecticut. And I actually probably got really interested in trauma-informed care to a degree, actually working with a youngster with autism. And the mother had come into the school and had gone to due process and had asked the school to do this special approach called relationship development intervention. And it's by a Dr. Goodstein. I believe he was out of Texas. I'm not an expert in the whole approach, but we had a consultant working with us, and the whole school team. So the school did this. They took this on, and the mother. It was really a home-based program, but the mother came into the school and worked with the team every day, and it changed my life as a therapist, because we ended up pulling the child out of the classroom. She was a little girl with autism. She was in preschool. And we worked for a whole year in a small room, most of the time with just her and the adult, and relationship activities. Everything was about relationship. We didn't really introduce academics per se. I mean, she was in preschool, but so everything was about working on reading nonverbal cues, attunement activities. And then as she progressed and she became more connected to us, we then, moved into bringing in one peer and then working in small groups. And down the road, she was, integrated back into the classroom slowly. And I loved it. It was fascinating, the whole approach. It was I thought, this is occupational therapy. We were working on flexible thinking, on, celebrating the completion of activities, of using, my therapeutic use of self. So how do I use myself to connect and do therapy with people? So it was using my body, my eye gazes, my, touch, my, I don't know, anything really that involves my relationship with her was what led her to be really successful. And by fourth grade, she was fully integrated into the classroom without a one-to-one paraprofessional. There was a paraprofessional in the room, but it was just, for me, I just thought, we can do this with every student. And, built into the program was sort of this idea of waiting. So waiting her out if she did not stay connected to us. We had to wait like a full 90 seconds before she came back, to see if she would come back to the activity. And And then if she didn't, you would approach her and try to make her do one more, try to engage her in one more turn or one more activity, one more time of doing something. And I just found that idea that she needed that time to process, and she needed to be given the opportunity to repair our relationship was just life-changing for me. And I started doing it with all my students.
Can you elucidate and kind of elaborate what maybe one or two of these interventions look like, the attunement and attachment? What exactly specifically did you do? You talked about using yourself, and I think a lot of us can guess or maybe surmise, but what did you do?
Sure, I'd love to. One of the first things I really started doing that built on sort of the things I did with her, I started to do with all my students, was the first time I'd meet them, I would simply just sit across from them. I might take out some beads, and I would hold up two beads, and I would say, you're going to pick one of the beads. So you're going to pick either the one in my right hand or the one in my left hand. And I'm going to nod my head yes or no, whether that's the bead I want you to take. And if I say yes, I want you to take it, and I want you to string it. So now I'm working on some fine motor activities, some bilateral hand activities, but they have to read, they just have to read my nod, yes or no. Mm-hmm. And, believe it or not, for some kids, they couldn't do that. So sometimes I would have to pair the language with it at first, and then I would back off and just do the nods. The kids love it. So then if it was I would do yes, yes, yes for several times, and then no, and then they would start to become intrigued as to why I was saying yes or no and which bead to take. And there was really no reason right, to do, why I was doing it. But what I found was it was a great way to get them in tune with me, for them to be clear about my nonverbal directions. I've often found frequently I could walk into a classroom after doing exercise like that. If a student was maybe doing, out of their seat and needed to sit back down, I could just look at them and shake my head no, and they would respond immediately.
Wow.
So to me, the ability for that nonverbal intervention was incredible. When you look at the processing issues that students have and stuff, I think that anytime you can minimize the language,
mm-hmm.
So then what I would do is I might start to step back from the student a little bit, give a little more space if they could handle it. And then I might start to do it as I'm walking them from their classroom to the therapy room. I might be doing the same activity in the hallway. And then by the time they get to my room, they're sort of tuned into me. And I found that, I'd like to it was a great way to use every possible therapy moment, to build their skills. So I did a lot of things in the hallway like that. And then what I might do is after they've sort of become competent and known what to expect doing it with beads, I might, in the current school I'm in, I was using a small marble run. I had middle school boys. So I would use a little marble run, and they'd have to pick a marble and put it in. And then it's kind of intriguing to the other students walking by, and they come over. They want to know what the student's doing. And pretty soon the student's really interesting to other kids. Mm-hmm. And then I might change it up. So after they've become competent with a marble run, I would put a baseball cap on my head, and I'd hold up two clothespins, and they would have to take the right clothespin and clip it on the brim of my hat. Mm-hmm. So now they have to, again, read my nonverbals. They have to facial gaze. It's funny. It's playful. I'm goofy.
As you're talking, I'm really realizing how you're breaking down what many of us just accept as normal, everyday interaction and behavior, right? Interpersonal behavior.
Absolutely.
And how it needs to be broken down and fundamentalized in a sense, step by step for these, for some of these kids, for some people.
Yeah. I mean, I even found with some of my, my middle school kids in the school where I work, and it's a functional classroom, but they would be raising their hands to answer questions in a group I was running, and I would nod my head yes, and they just look at me. And what I realized was that they didn't know what that meant, even at the age of 14. So I had to actually just do some very, we're going to line up at the door. I'm going to look at you, and when I nod my head yes, I want you to get up and walk to the door. And, that I was taken aback even then that, I was still having to kind of teach those skills, even at that age,
Awesome. Thanks for doing that. So let's kind of continue to talk more about your own story, how you got into this, and see where that goes.
Okay. Well, I got into occupational therapy. I think partly because, when I was a junior in college, I was in a psychology of death and dying class, and I was always kind of interested in how people made meaning out of suffering. That was really interesting to me, and I went to a Jesuit college called Fairfield University in Connecticut, and so we had to take some religion classes, and I had some great professors. I had one when we studied religion that asked us to look at a situation in our life, and that when we did a survey of religions. So if we were studying Buddhism, we had to kind of summarize the reading that we did, and then we had to say, how would this religion tell us to deal with sort of the the challenge in our life that we were facing. So, I sort of had this little spiritual journey of sort of looking at something in my life. At the time, it was a grandmother who's with Alzheimer's disease who was living with us, and how this particular religion would tell me to deal with it. And we had some other, I had some other courses like Prophets of Nonviolence, so things studying people like Martin Luther King, and looking at how do you be present with people who are suffering. So I was always very intrigued with that. What does it mean to be present with people that are suffering? And I was an English major, so I was immersed in stories. And sometimes I thought, how did I make this jump from English to occupational therapy? But really, it's all about being in people's stories, I think, when you're in therapy. So I guess it wasn't really that big of a leap. I ended up actually then working when I graduated for a company that adapted children's books to film and video, but decided, I really still wanted to do something with maybe ill children. Mm-hmm. And I ended up going up to Boston and just looking around the job signs at the hospitals up there and saw something called an occupational therapist and researched it and thought, this is what I would like to do. Mm. So that is sort of how I got into occupational therapy. And, then I just went to OT school and worked in a variety of different settings. And then ended up adopting, about 3 or 4 years into my career, adopting 2 boys, a year and a half apart or so, from Russia. I guess as we got them home and just started encountering some of the challenges, that you're dealing with kids that have been in an orphanage, who maybe haven't had solid attachment. So sometimes their hyperactivity, their impulsivity. Sometimes we started to see learning issues, attention issues, and trying to understand what approach did they need. They really responded to playfulness. They didn't do well with sort of traditional kinds of disciplining. And so I'm a reader, so I started trying to learn, about why this was. So all this is going on while I'm sort of doing this special program with this little girl at the elementary school with autism, and I started to think, my goodness, this is so interesting. Everything we're doing with her mm-hmm. is really things that would be fantastic for people that need to work on attachment with their children that they've adopted. So I just started to see these 2 paths kind of coming together, and it just all made sense. And I think it was kind of when the ACEs study came out that I just had this huge aha moment where I was like, oh my goodness, there's neurological reasons for all of this. And that was just a huge, for me, just a total aha moment. I almost couldn't sleep at night because it was like almost everything I had been learning and trying to figure out made sense. When I started learning, what was happening to the brain.
Was it challenging to? I mean, it's one thing to know this information and to work with clients, but oftentimes I think it can be different when it's your own kids, your own children. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it was. In some ways, I had a lot of understanding. I knew that my kids needed a lot of outdoor time, a lot of activity. We would go to the park across the street and dig in the sandbox. I was always mm-hmm. the last person at the pool on a rainy day to leave. I was always using sensory experiences, as a parent and an occupational therapist. I was sometimes puzzled, I think with sort of some of the school stuff about, sometimes feeling that, there's sort of a lack of understanding about maybe what they needed at school in terms of services. That was sometimes challenging. Sometimes working as an OT all day and then coming home and having similar challenges with my children could be, tiring or, but I think I understood the need for simplicity in our own life and our family life, but, not traveling a lot on the weekends, giving them time to just play at home and be quiet and not be overloaded. But they didn't thrive in sort of the typical things that a lot of children do in terms of being on sports teams. And, a lot of that was just too overwhelming. So at times it could be lonely, as a parent of a child with special needs. And I think that helped me, though, I think a lot to understand the parents of the students that I, interacted with and the struggles they were facing.
Were I guess what worked with them? I mean, were the things that you were utilizing with them or implementing, were they helping, and to what degree? What worked, quote unquote?
Yeah. It was a lot of different things. I mean, we in addition to sort of just lots of making sure that we had good sleep, making sure that we had snacks, sort of making sure all their basic needs were met, that they felt safe maybe in situations that other students or other children might not feel, so nervous about. Sometimes one of my older son, anytime we went anywhere, he would tend to get, I think it was anxiety probably, but anxious, about where, right before he got there, he almost always threw up in the car. And so trying to kind of, appreciate, some of the emotions that they must be feeling that, we had no idea about. But I think a lot of it was just keeping life simple, getting the right professionals involved, exploring medication at times, meeting with teachers, it was a journey. It was interesting because it was kind of this dichotomy of being a parent and trying to figure it out on that side, and then I would go to work and be the professional. So it all, I could do it as a professional, but I still needed the support as a parent, from my village of friends and neighbors and professionals.
But it sounds like they were lucky to have you.
Well, thanks. Thank you.
Boy, oh boy.
Yeah, I'm not, it's a challenge, and it still is some days, and there's, and I think that brought for me, a real understanding and ability to relate to, I don't know that I would have appreciated the trauma-informed approach without being an adoptive parent, and I really admire people that can, because I really think that is what helped me, to really appreciate this approach and to say these, it is about the relationship. People need to feel safe. These kids need to feel safe. They have sensory, they're easily overwhelmed. They don't process things quickly. I don't think I would have appreciated that to the depth that I do had I not had it with my own children.
Let's talk about, kind of switch gears here, and I want to ask you about a kind of an early clinical error. I want you to tell us that story. I mean, you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah. I was trying to think of something really specific. I still go back to that more that maybe not a specific incident, but that idea of just not talking so much, of talking too much, of trying to be a cheerleader, and entertaining to keep the child stimulated. And what I found as I gained more experience was that sometimes really lots of repetition was really what the child needed. They needed sameness. I think understanding what it means to provide like a just right challenge, we call it in occupational therapy, where like, you try to find that place where you're challenging the student or your client just enough to the point where they feel successful and competent. And so it's sort of walking a fine line where, you're getting them to really be able to find that place of confidence and competency on their own, with your guidance. I think appreciating my role as a co-regulator, I think I learned a lot of that with that relationship development intervention program. I think valuing myself and the role of adults and interventionists as co-regulators. We have a really important role to set that sense of calmness and safety. And probably if I had to say anything else, it would be, the big idea of taking better care of myself in the process of all of it. It's, as a caregiver, as a parent of kids with special needs, and as an occupational therapist, to really making sure that I'm taking time out for, to regroup.
What does that look like for you? How do you do that?
For me now, I take walks with friends. I try to get together with friends. I ballroom dance. I took ballroom dance lessons, which actually was inspired by my younger son.
Oh wow!
So he liked sports, but it was a lot for him to manage, sports teams, and he played a little bit, but. And I think, he had some motor planning issues and stuff. So he wasn't always, it was fun to play sports, but it wasn't always his best thing. And then he was in a play, and that's the other thing, is appreciating the arts as an outlet. I didn't really grow up in a particularly artistic family, but the arts have been so amazing for my children. But he was in a play, and they learned ballroom steps for Cinderella ballroom scene, and he decided he liked that. And so since sixth grade, he's been taking ballroom dance lessons. And it's fantastic. It engages the whole body, and memory and rhythm and tempo. And so I never was a dancer. And so I started, after about 4 years, started taking lessons, and it was a great activity for us to do together. And it changed me. It was very healing for me. It's always fun, and it's very relational, which I like.
Have you? I'm guessing you've worked at some point and at some level with mental health clinicians. What advice would you give to those people who are just starting out, clinicians who are just starting out on this journey to become trauma informed? You've been doing this for a while as an occupational therapist, but what would you say to them?
Yeah. I think a few of the things that I've probably already alluded to, but I would say try to get an understanding of the neuroscience. I think it'll help make sense of a lot of things. I think it helps you not to be so maybe judgmental about where a child is coming from. If you can appreciate that there's just been brain changes. I think I'm always trying to encourage the clinicians, that I've worked with to, why don't you try cooking? Instead of just sitting and chatting, maybe you could get, sit and, make a box of, brownies with them.
And what's the response you get when you say that?
Yeah, I should. But it's something to it's something, if you're not used to doing that, to plan. It takes planning. You have to get the materials and whatnot. But sometimes I will you try to model it for people, or share stories of what happened, or in the elementary school I worked in, I did a lot of, we did a lot of co-treatments with a special ed teacher and speech language pathologist. We worked together a lot. And, just we could learn what each other was working on and carry that over, but also, gave me an opportunity to say, if you want to work on reading, it's really good to stimulate the brain through swinging. Why don't we get the sight words out and put the child on a swing and, have the child swing while they're trying to, practice their sight words. But it was hard. I would say to the reading, instructionist, feel free to use the swing. I'll come do it with you. But it was hard to break people out of their traditional roles. Right. But once you did, if you found those few, some of those teachers that did, and it could be a really amazing collaboration.
Yeah.
Get the special ed teacher to go down to the gym with you and, work on reading with, while the child's on scooter boards and things like that. So
awesome.
the importance of movement and touch. It's what I sort of keep trying to stress. And being in a therapeutic school, and that was my biggest, it's been kind of interesting and fun to be back in the mental health side of things. As OTs, we get training both in mental health and physical disabilities. Yeah. And, because we've been so kind of immersed in the physical disabilities piece, because, I don't know, it's just people work in hospitals and things a lot. It's been fun to really go back to my roots and be like, these students, they need some time to just do some things with their hands. They need to move. If you want to teach them their math facts, get them up and moving around. Have them jump out a number line. Have them, we did something about your triggers and what pushes your buttons. So, let's sew a button and then label the button, what their trigger button is, and teaching functional activities. And when people are traumatized and they're in crisis, the little things that you do every day that seem so easy and natural and second nature, all of a sudden become hard. It's hard to get up and get dressed. It's, it's hard to engage in your daily activities. And so, and sometimes there's sensory issues, and that's a big piece of working in trauma-informed care is understanding the sensory piece. Of being hyper-aroused and hypo-aroused, and what strategies are going to help bring a child down to a place where they can participate in school or home, or what things are going to, kind of get them up so that they can engage. So that's a real area for OTs to focus on.
Awesome. I love it. How about a go-to book recommendation, whether, trauma related or not, or OT related or not? What do you have?
Yeah, can I say a couple?
Sure.
So one of my favorite books when I was getting started as a parent and as an OT working in a school is a book called Help for Billy, and it's by Heather T. Forbes. And it's kind of a relational approach to helping children in the classroom. So she gives lots of a really good, I think, neuro introduction. It was one of the first ones that kind of just grabbed me and was an aha moment for me. And then she just gives lots of ideas and lots of support and understanding that, a lot of this isn't rooted in sort of so much behaviors as it is in, self-regulation issues and what they can do. So I loved that book.
Wait, hold on. Say that last statement again. A lot of this isn't rooted in behavior. Explain that, because I think that's important.
Well, yeah, maybe, that idea, that trauma idea, instead of saying why are you doing this? It's sort of what happened to you that's making you do this, right? Right. So that's sort of what I'm getting at with that,
Yeah, I think it's so important. It's so easy to get blinded by what, the behaviors. They kind of become explosive on paper, right? And that's what you see. But I really appreciate you kind of highlighting that. So thank you.
Yeah. You can feel like a child's coming in ready to, they come in there ready to torture me,
right.
No child's getting up, coming to school wanting to be a difficult child. Things are happening for them, and, let's get at what those things are. Another great book that's written by an occupational therapist that's kind of exciting right now, and she's coming out with a curriculum in the fall. It's called Interoception, the Eighth Sensory System, and that's by Kelly Mahler. She's an occupational therapist, and she's doing a lot of research on how we feel sensations in our body. What does it mean to feel hungry? What's happening in our body when we have inner sensations? And then there's a lot of research that's showing that that's connected to our emotions. So it's almost like the first step in teaching self-regulation is trying to figure out getting people to tune into their body. So it's that real, bottom-up approach. So I think that's really exciting work that she's doing. And, I just have to give a little plug. One of your guests gave a plug on it. He recommended East of Eden, and it wasn't, really a trauma professional book at all. And I went out and immediately listened to it, and I loved that recommendation.
Oh, cool.
So, Yeah, so I'm gonna recommend a book called Storyworthy. It's by a storyteller and teacher in the area where I live, and he's won something like 35 of the Moth Radio Hour story competitions. And the book is called Storyworthy. And there's a little subtitle, but it's long, so I'll just leave it at Storyworthy. It's by Matthew Dicks, Dicks. And he just talks about the small moments, the little moments in life, getting up and telling stories about it's the small moments in life that really make us who we are and that make life worth living. And I kind of feel like that as an occupational therapist. We're down in the kind of the muddy waters of just the real simple daily life activities with people, and it may seem not very glamorous, and it may seem sometimes we say, geez, it's so practical, it's so functional, it's so easy, but it's not when you realize that not everybody does get that, and those are the beautiful moments, and there's the little things in our life that make us feel good about who we are, and feeling independent and competent and in control.
So true. I love that you highlighted that. So just again, everything is going to be up at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. I want to remind everyone that I'm speaking with Teri Barney, occupational therapist extraordinaire. The 3 books, Help for Billy, A Beyond Consequences Approach to Helping Challenging Children in the Classroom, Interoception, second book, The 8th Century System, and then Storyworthy, Engage, Teach, Persuade, and Change Your Life Through the Power of Storytelling.
Thank you.
All right, Teri, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
I have an email, otemotions@gmail.com. I have a
emotions. Okay, awesome.
I have a little Facebook page that I'm is started under the same title, but it's kind of under construction. I'm sort of hoping to start a little side practice, kind of specializing in self-regulation, trauma, and attachment, and
awesome.
OT. Yeah, so I'm sort of working on that slowly, trying to figure out how I can do that, and I'm excited.
Awesome. Look, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Really, I appreciate it. You're the first occupational therapist I've had on here, and it's been awesome. I want to thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, Teri, take care.
You have a great day. Bye-bye.